The auditorium lights flared on like merciless spotlights. At the center of the stage stood a fragile girl, her shoulders curved under the invisible weight of insecurity. She took a deep breath. The microphone in front of her looked too big, almost as if daring her to belong there. But the silence she hoped for never came. The first laugh cracked through the air like glass shattering, then another, and another. Within seconds, she was surrounded by a sea of muffled chuckles, sharp whispers, and mocking stares. They weren't laughing because she told a joke. They were laughing because she dared to exist where they believed she didn't belong. She hadn't said a single word. In the front row, a few students raised their phones not to capture memories, but to collect someone else's humiliation. What she felt in that moment wasn't just embarrassment. It was that searing kind of pain that burns without leaving a visible mark. It was being reduced to a caricature, like her mere attempt to speak was the punchline. Off to the side of the stage, a man stood still. A father. Her father. He saw everything. But what no one saw was what it did to him on the inside. She walked off the stage with short, trembling steps, like someone trying not to fall apart before reaching shelter. Behind the curtain, the darkness offered temporary relief. No one could laugh there. No one could judge. But silence. Silence could still hurt. She stopped, lowered her eyes, and everything she had been holding in fell. In thick, silent, desperate tears. Her father was there. He knelt down in front of her without a word, just opened his arms. She didn't hesitate. In that embrace, she collapsed. His hands trembled, but stayed firm around her fragile back. He rocked her gently like he used to when she was a baby, when the world was kinder, and a hug was enough to fix everything. But the world had changed, and he knew that what she was facing now couldn't be healed with a Band-Aid or a bedtime story. He wanted to scream, to storm into the audience and tell every cruel teenager that what they did was unforgivable. But he didn't scream. He didn't cry. He held it all in. Because in that moment, she didn't need another crack in her world. She needed something solid to hold on to. And if he shattered too, who would hold her together? She tried to speak, but only managed to choke out a question. Why do they hate me so much? He pulled her closer. They don't hate you, sweetheart. They're just afraid of what they don't understand. And you are so much more than they can even begin to see. She didn't reply. The silence that followed was heavy, so heavy it felt like the air between them had weight. He felt her tears slow against his shoulder, but they didn't stop. Her body still trembled, caught in that half-awake panic of a nightmare she couldn't escape. And he stayed, not to fix, not to promise it would pass, just to be there. Because sometimes what holds a broken soul together isn't words, it's presence. She was still sobbing, eyes lost somewhere between the stage and nothingness. Her smudged makeup told a story no one outside that curtain could ever understand. It wasn't just shame, it was the crushing feeling of not belonging anywhere. Her father, voice hoarse from holding back emotion, broke the silence with the kind of words you don't find in books. If you want to leave, we'll leave. Right now. Just say the word. She looked up at him, eyes still wet. And if I stay? He cupped her face in his hands, as if holding something sacred. If you stay, I'll be here, from beginning to end. Even if everyone else turns their back, I won't. Not today. Not ever. She didn't answer, but this time, not out of fear. This time, because for the first time that night, she felt something that wasn't fear. She felt that she wasn't alone. And in that space between the chaos and the comfort of her father's arms, something still small, still fragile began to stir inside her, a will. Not to prove anything to the world, but not to let the world destroy her. In the school hallways, the mere sound of laughter made her shrink inside. Because after that night on stage, laughter didn't come with context anymore. It came with intention. Laughs disguised as conversation. Whispers just loud enough not to be innocent. Stares that lingered just long enough to hurt. She was no longer just another girl in class. She was the joke who tried to be an artist. The video of her performance, cropped, edited, mocked, had already made its rounds. It had likes, cruel comments, names she recognized. People who used to sit near her, laugh with her. No, they laughed at her. She began walking with her eyes fixed on the floor, chose the farthest restrooms to avoid being seen, started asking to go home early. And at home, silence. A thick, heavy silence, not from lack of words, but from the weight of too much pain. Her father noticed. Of course he did. But he also knew some wounds can't be healed with cliches. So at night, he left the hallway light on, made her favorite tea without her needing to ask, and stayed close, available, invisibly present. The stage from that night had long been taken down, but inside her, it was still standing. Every laugh still echoed, every misstep, every look. School had become a battlefield, the stage, her sentence, and she, the prisoner of a public humiliation that refused to end. But what no one saw was that even silent wars can hide resistance growing quietly beneath the surface. And she wasn't alone. She didn't want to go. When the drama teacher announced a new performance, this time smaller, just for classmates and parents, her heart pounded in her chest. Same stage, same people, same fear. How could she walk up there again, knowing the memory still stung? But she didn't say no. She just stayed quiet. Because sometimes saying yes is just another way of screaming, "I can't take this anymore." The night before the performance, she ate dinner in silence, barely touched her food, then locked herself in her room, saying she needed to study. Her father sat at the table longer than usual, staring not at his plate, but at the closed door. And in the early hours of the morning, when he went to check on her, she was still awake, lying there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like she was waiting for a sign that would never come. He didn't speak right away, just sat on the edge of her bed and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice came out as a whisper. "What if it happens again?" He was silent for a moment, then leaned in, like he was about to share a secret. "Sweetheart, you might fall again. They might laugh again. The world might throw the same cruelty at you. But there's one thing no one can ever take from you." She turned her face to him. "What is it?" "Your courage. And courage isn't what makes people applaud. It's what makes you get up there, even when you know they might not." She didn't answer, just closed her eyes. And in that quiet, sleepless night, her father stayed there, sitting beside her, until she finally drifted off. When she woke up, there was a note waiting on her desk. "No matter what they say, I'll be there." Clapping before, during, and after. And that morning, her hands trembling as she held the note, she realized something. Maybe it would still hurt. But she wasn't alone. And that changed everything. The basement was damp, cluttered with old boxes and memories packed away for too long. But there, between wooden beams and dusty shelves, something new was being built. Courage. It was his idea. "If you're going back on that stage, sweetheart, we do it our way." She hesitated at first. Shame still clung to her skin like fresh paint. But when he turned on a flashlight, set up 2 chairs, and built a stage out of old crates, she laughed. For the first time in days, she laughed. And then she read one short piece, then another. Her voice came out shaky at first, timid, fractured. But he listened like he was hearing the most beautiful sound in the world. He didn't correct her, didn't interrupt, didn't push. He just looked at her eyes full of silent pride, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. Night after night, she read more. Night after night, her voice steadied. Until one evening, she wasn't just reading with her eyes on the paper. She started lifting her head, looking at him while she spoke, believing slowly, gently that her voice deserved to be heard. Their time in the basement became ritual, a secret pact. He brought hot cocoa. She brought her words. And in that basement, where the outside world couldn't laugh or judge, she began to rebuild herself, not as the girl who had once broken on stage, but as someone who had something worth saying, and only the two of them knew. It was the most beautiful secret between a father and his daughter, the quiet rebirth of courage, night after night, in whispered lines, shy smiles, and applause that hadn't yet come, but that already echoed inside them both. The auditorium was smaller, fewer lights, fewer people. But to her, it felt like the same minefield. The stage floor still creaked. The rows of chairs still formed a sea of eyes. And the silence before speaking still felt terrifying. But something was different that night. She didn't walk in alone. Outside the door, just before it opened, he took her hands in his. No matter what happens in there, you've already won. Because you're going. She nodded. Her eyes still held fear, yes. But not only fear. There was something else this time, strength. Not the kind that shouts. A kind that stays despite the trembling. When her name was called, her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. But her feet moved. She stepped up. The lights found her face. And for one long second, everything stopped. In the crowd, he smiled. Slowly, eyes wet, but posture firm, like he was holding up the weight of the world with nothing but his will to see her okay. She took a breath. The first line came out shaky, but it came. The second stronger, the third louder. And suddenly, it felt like the basement was there with her. Like her father was still just 2 feet away, holding a mug of hot cocoa and saying with his eyes, "Keep going, sweetheart. Keep going." And she did. She didn't yet know how the audience would react. Didn't know if they'd listen with their hearts or laugh like before. But that didn't matter anymore. She wasn't there for them. She was there for herself, and for the father who had quietly helped piece her back together word by word. She finished the last line with her breath caught in her throat. The kind of breath that doesn't come from the lungs. It comes from the soul. For one suspended second, everything froze. A second that stretched like eternity. The audience was silent. Not like before. Not the silence that comes just before mockery. This was different. Something hung in the air. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one moved. She felt her heart pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. Cold sweat traced her spine. She braced herself for the worst. And then someone clapped. Just one person. Slow, hesitant, timid applause. She almost turned to see who it was, but before she could, another clap joined. Then another. Suddenly, the sound began to grow. What had started as a lonely gesture swelled into a wave. The audience, the same one that had once drowned her in cruel laughter, now rose, row by row, in a standing ovation. But this sound, this wasn't ridicule. It didn't sting. It didn't belittle. It was the sound of surprise, of realization, of admiration. And at the back of the room, among them all, her father clapped too. But his smile wasn't one of surprise. It was one of confirmation. He had always known. She tried to hold back tears, but they came, not from shame. This time, they came from relief. Because for the first time, she felt it. They were listening. The piece she read that night wasn't just a school performance. It was a hidden confession. An open wound turned into written lines. And every word carried more than rhyme. It carried scars. She had written it all in secret, between the 4 walls of her bedroom and the quiet nights in the basement. And instead of pretending it never happened, she chose to speak, calmly, painfully, but with a voice. You laughed at me before you even knew my name, before you heard my sound, as if my presence was the punchline, but I am verse. I am what remains when the laughter fades. The audience listened. They felt it. And in that moment, she did something few ever dare to do. She took the very weapon used against her, the stage, and turned it into shelter. The same people who once looked away now faced her. Some cried. Others swallowed their shame like it was too bitter to hide. She didn't accuse, didn't point fingers. She simply spoke about pain, about fear, about shame, but mostly about beginning again. Because the cruelty that had almost silenced her had become the raw material of her courage. And in that moment, with her voice trembling and her soul standing tall, she didn't just survive the joke. She turned it into poetry. The next day, the hallways felt different. The stairs that once weighed her down now looked away. Those who had laughed lowered their eyes. She walked across the courtyard and heard whispers, but not the kind that cut, the kind that wondered. Did you see what she did last night? How did she have the courage? Dude, I cried. I seriously cried. In class, one of the popular girls, the same one who laughed the loudest during that first performance, waited until the bell rang. No sarcasm, no excuses. Just looked her in the eye and said, I'm sorry. Really. Then she walked away. Later, her literature teacher stopped her in the hallway and asked to use her piece as a reading in next week's class. Even the principal, who rarely paid attention to student performances, called her into the office just to say, it's an honor to have someone like you representing our school. She didn't know how to respond. She was still the same girl, same clothes, same hair, same worn-out backpack. But something inside her had shifted, not because of the applause, but because she realized that by confronting her own ghosts in the open, she had helped others face theirs quietly from the shadows. Other students started writing too. A theater group was formed. A new performance was scheduled with a theme, Voices That Need to Be Heard. She opened the show, and this time, everyone listened from the very first line. Because when one person dares to speak with their heart exposed, the world around them begins to change. The performance was over. The lights dimmed slowly, as if even they didn't want to interrupt the moment. Students trickled out of the auditorium, eyes glossy. Teachers stood still absorbing the weight of her words. But she saw none of it. She was searching for just one face in the crowd, the only face that mattered. And when she saw him standing at the door, eyes shining, arms open, she ran. Not like someone seeking protection, but like someone coming home. He wrapped her up in his arms with a fierceness that felt like a shield, as if he could hold back the world that had once tried to break her. And in that embrace, not a single word was spoken, because none were needed. She cried, but now the tears came from somewhere else, from the relief of having faced it, from the joy of surviving, from the beauty of finally being heard. He held her face in his hands, his own eyes wet. You were incredible. She smiled, shyly, like she wasn't sure she believed it yet. But he cut in, gently but firm. No, listen to me. You were massive, bigger than any laugh, bigger than any fear. And in the middle of the crowd filing out, the buzz of compliments and invitations, the world paused for just 1 second. Because father and daughter both knew in that instant, everything had changed. And even though life would still bring challenges that day, they had won, together. After that night, she was never the same, and in some quiet way, neither was the school. Other students began to take the stage, students who once chose invisibility over risk, boys with stutters, girls afraid of their own bodies. teens carrying too many scars to fit on a report card, and she was there. Front row, clapping, cheering, standing up when no one else dared to. She became a reference point. Not because she was perfect, but because she had shown that imperfection, when embraced, is what makes us unforgettable. Her father watched from a distance, sometimes from the school's doorway, sometimes pretending to read in the car while she lit up another rehearsal, and always with that same quiet smile, steady, proud, unshakable. He knew. He knew that the girl who once trembled behind the curtain had become the voice others needed to find their own. But more than that, he knew it all began in that first moment when he didn't look away, when he chose, silently and completely, to stay. Because sometimes the greatest transformations don't come from grand gestures. They come from a hug that doesn't let go, from a presence that doesn't give up, from a love that rebuilds slowly, quietly, with no spotlight and no applause. And that's how one girl's courage, held up by a father's unwavering strength, lit a fire that spread far beyond the two of them. It lit the way for anyone who would one day need someone to say, "If you stay, I'll be right here."